Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here after all these years. And I was here in the third year of the festival, which takes a while. So I've been here many other years. Giles is my co-director and writer on this film, and it wouldn't exist if it hadn't been for Giles. But he knew I had all this footage of Afghanistan, and he got interested. And said, oh, let me see it, and so on, and took it away to Paris, and that's what we're going to see tonight, what he did.
It's a special night for us because we finished the film in Paris. We did all the grading and things in Paris, and Jim wasn't there right at the end for the grading, so this is going to be our first chance to see the film together.
We enjoyed the film, and I think I'm so shocked by that photograph. I want that.
Thank you to you for sharing this with us. We'll take
Upstate New York, I had in my house, and once in a while I would take it out. In those days, you had a projector, and put the projector up, and people were interested in it. I was interested. I liked looking at it from time to time. But I would put it back in the box and go on and do whatever I was doing.
what
I mean, I knew it was very interesting footage, and as we moved on through time, it was more and more rare, and showed us the country that was going through such hell.
and at what point did you make the link, the various links that you explore in this film, to yourself, to other work, to other writing?
Well, that was Giles. I mean, this film wouldn't exist if it weren't for Giles, because Giles saw that footage and he thought that something should be done with it, right?
Right, well, in fact, the beginning of it was, we were talking over lunch, and I think I was talking about a film that I was going to edit about Afghanistan, and you said, oh, I have some footage from Afghanistan, and you can use one as archive, you know?
When was this?
Oh, this is 3 or 4 years ago, maybe longer. And so I was thinking that he had a little can of film, and that we were upstate, the beautiful house you see there, and you were heading back down to the city that day, and you said, well, just take the key and you're going to find it up in the wardrobe in Ismail's bedroom. So the next day I went over there, and I was crawling on my hands and knees into the back of this closet and found this box where James had said I would find it, and pulled it out, opened it, and it was 16 cans of film in there. It was enough to make a feature film. And
So there was about 10,000 feet.
it was
16 millimeter.
and it's just a treasure waiting to be discovered. And then, because of the distance, I was in Paris and Jim was here, we had logistical problems being able to communicate about, we couldn't watch the footage together, so I would look at the footage and then I would call Jim and ask him questions about what I was looking at. And I think quite early on, one of the things that I saw in the footage was this tomb. And said, what is this tomb in the film? And then Jim introduced me to Babur. And I think that started this idea that it could be, I went out and bought a copy of Babur, the Baburnama, and I read it. And apart from all the fighting, battle scenes and massacres and head chopping, there's this young man who's setting out into the world to find his way. And there was something so charming and interesting about it. I think that spurred this idea that we could find some parallels with Jim setting out into the world to find his way.
And that didn't occur to me. It occurred to you. It wasn't.
Yeah, you jumped on the bandwagon pretty quick.
I didn't say no.
It's almost as if you were waiting for a moment or someone to instigate this opportunity to dig into this footage at the very least?
Well, I felt a little guilty about it. I mean, I knew I had something good there, and I knew that I thought sooner or later I will do something with it. But I never really seriously began to think what. But he did, and that's why we're here tonight.
And James, how easy did this notion of creating a memoir that connects this footage to the film we now see, weaving in your own story, your own
Well,
life?
it just kind of came about. I mean,
Well, I'll tell you, I mean,
you would really, you better answer that.
Jim, he's a very good living example of that adage of never throw anything away. He has the most incredible things that he's kept. And what sort of happened is, I think I'd do some editing, I'd send you things to look at, and then you'd send me a bunch of letters that you'd written to your mother while you were in Kabul, and it was extraordinary, it was more treasure.
Right.
And this would provoke another wave of editing. And then you would send me something you'd written while you were there. A beautiful story about meeting a man in the street who handed you a rose. And all of these things that you passed my way, they started weaving their way into the film, found my home, and it was sort of like that. Long distance, but gifts.
Let me tell you what I just found.
Oh, God.
I was up in that attic again, and I found a little metal box. And I opened it, and it's all the letters that I wrote to my parents while I was in the army.
Wow.
With a note from my mother saying, read these because it may be of interest to you later on. So I started reading them. And I'm not saying that I'm going to make such a film. I mean, how can I? I mean, I was sent to Germany, and I was at all kinds of places where I was in the army, but there's that stack of letters, and
We'll take a look at that.
someone has a look. No.
And so the notion of telling your own story was comfortable,
Yeah.
ultimately.
Oh, it wasn't ultimate. I mean, it's never bothered me to tell my own story. I mean, not in a formal way in terms of the movie, but
There were a few moments. You had a couple of moments where you said, "What's that in there for? We don't need to
Well,
say
that's
that."
true.
Such as.
Well, they're not in there, so.
So we see the one has to be. Well, and maybe help us understand that creative collaboration the two of you had. What would ultimately make it into the film? What would be trimmed away to keep a sort of focus, maybe?
I think that this is, it's the balance so that you don't go too far away from Afghanistan, and so trying to keep the kind of souffle going was, I think, probably a lot of the deciding factor. We're trying to keep it quite close to places where we had parallels, where your story moved forward. The thing, I think, one of the things that was clear to me anyway was that there was something about when you're young, you're kind of looking at the world in a way in which you're having to make choices and decisions about what you want to do. And I think I had children who are just becoming young adults while I was working on this material. And I see with them that how difficult that is and frightening it is to make the wrong choices and to know who you are. And listening, looking at the stories that Jim was talking about himself when he was young, I had the feeling that you somehow answered some of those questions quite early on in your life. So when we see this young boy saying, I decided that I was special in some ways and that I was distinct, from that moment on, the choices you seemed to make were very unusual. I mean, who was going off, getting into Indian miniatures in 1960 or 50, whatever. You chose your own path. You decided that you didn't care what other people thought, you would go your way. And I just thought that's a really great kind of universal sort of message for us all, really. That if you just forge your own path, you're going to make a good filmmaker.
But I had people to forge it with me. I had Ruth and his mom.
Yeah, but this is before that. already
before,
you were
but-
making
but-
very unusual choices. You know, you were doing kind of very distinct things. And so I think the stories from your childhood and leading up to this point in Kabul were fairly focused around that, sort of trying to sort of highlight that or draw attention to the fact that these are decisions that have been made to move yourself forward and bring you to this extraordinary place to be in Kabul with a camera filming. You know, you think, how did you get here? And it's always interesting. to
Well, it used to be
backtrack
cool.
and try to understand.
I'm going to ask you to elaborate on how you landed on such a profound sentence that I'll read back because I put a yellow highlighter on it. I came to feel that two gay men united in their commitment to each other, single-mindedly pursuing a common goal, could end up ruling the world. Such a beautiful statement.
Well, I just thought that one day, and I guess that was the first time I thought it. But I mean, well, of course, what the two gay men are doing has got to be something worth doing. It can't just be any old thing.
It's an empowering statement.
Right.
And it's an empowering example.
It has some kind of shades of echo as well with Moore and his, setting out,
Right.
conquering the world.
Right.
So it's nice that somehow the Babur and the Jim stories sort of come together a little bit there as well.
Before we take some questions from the audience, let me ask you to share your decision-making process around the music that you chose. There's such beautiful pieces and choices that you made to pull together all of these stories. Tell us about those discussions you had.
Well, that was a great piece of luck because I mean that was Giles's idea about Alexander Desplat. I mean, I've heard his music in many films, and but that was really Giles. I'm thankful for that because that didn't occur to me. I hadn't got to really thinking about the music. Or I was thinking a little bit about the music, and I was thinking that somewhere in the film, or maybe there'd be a lot of it, there would be some actual Afghan music of some kind. And I didn't have any because I didn't record any. I was there all that summer without any sound equipment. All I had was my camera. So, and I didn't know much about Afghan music. So I was very grateful that Giles came up with that solution. And I like the film a lot, and I think it's perfect for this film. I'm just amazed sometimes when I hear it. I mean, with the particular image. So, like those guys making the mud bricks, with that sort of percussive thing that's going on. I mean, that is so, to me, that's so dramatic.
I mean, from my point of view, I've admired Desplat for a long time, adored his music. So he would, top of the pile for me, thinking, wow, could we use that? So I'd already put tent music in his scores. Jim liked it as well. And then the idea that we could actually maybe ask him. And that's what's beautiful about working with Jim. He picks up the phone and phones him. And a week later, I'm sitting in a theatre with Desplat watching the film together. And he said he liked it and wanted to do it. So it was just a kind of dream come true for me. And it was really nice. It worked out really well.
I'd love to hear from the audience, maybe give you a chance to ask a couple of questions. So if you don't mind raising your hand if you have one, I see someone almost in the back with a microphone that's going to come to you.
My life and did what I wanted to do, and it was never, a big moment or anything of that kind. Where I had to make a giant announcement, and I was not afraid of anything of that sort. I mean, I just lived my life. I mean, if you're gonna have a career with this much you can hardly expect to have all that silence, and I had to be open about everything. But I mean, it's hard to answer that question. There was never a problem. It was not a struggle for me. I'm one of those lucky people that didn't have to struggle with all that, and I never felt a moment of guilt. And that's because, like that little boy standing there thinking that there was something special, I had a kind of mindset about, well, if I did it, if I wanted to do it and I did it, it must be okay. I'm who I am. It was something like that. But a friend of mine, I told that once to a friend, he says, Jim, that's the attitude of a serial killer. Really, that is pretty much the history of my moving forward in life. We all do things we wish we hadn't done. We don't want to talk about them, but unlike anybody else, but on the whole, it was okay.
Let's take another question. It looks like right here in the center, and then we'll go to the back.
I was so impressed by the weaving together all those themes and parts of your life, and I'm just curious about that process and Giles and how you work together to weave so many threads into the story in such a flow that was just, it felt so effortless.
Well, thank you.
I think one of the things, you weren't being rushed to do anything. This was a project that you could spend time on or then not spend time on. And then you could develop something and then something else, but there was no rush to do anything or to do a certain thing by a certain time, or it wasn't like commercial filmmaking, which, I mean, I know all about that. You have to think fast and hard all the time, and you're exhausted.
we had a producer quite late on, and so a lot of the creative choices we had already, like Jim was saying, we were working on it. I was working on it between other editing jobs, so I would go away and come back to it. In between time, Jim would also be thinking about things. So it was quite a long process, and it's interesting when you have that space between different parts of the editing. You have those moments where you're out having a walk on up and then think, hold it, wouldn't that be a nice? And then you go back in and start playing with those things, which I think, like you said.
And as I watched it, I mean, things would, sooner or later you would send me something, and as I watched it, I mean, I would think about it.
Yeah, you
produce other things slowly. And
you'd watch it and you'd call me the next morning and said, I woke up in the middle of the night and I had a brilliant idea. Maybe some new text or a new idea.
We really are just about out of time, but I said we'll take one more question in the back. So there was someone who had their hand all the way in the back. And then if you don't mind it, take one last one.
Thank you very much. I also really enjoyed the film. And I think it's captured the mystery of Cabo. At the same time, I still am unable to fully understand Lagour's absolute and complete love of Cabo, in contrast with other places in India that are beautiful. Do you have an explanation as to this?
well, I just had to, he said it and wrote about it over and over and stayed his whole life there and wanted to be buried there. And if he said it, I had to accept that that was how he felt. And is that what you mean? I mean,
Did you ever doubt it? You seem certain. You felt that you really saw this strong connection that the two of you explored.
It's very clear, and
It's very
in the
clear.
book, he repeat like Jim said, he repeatedly describes. I mean, there's endless passages where he's talking about the trees and the flowers and the land. Now you have to like Babur. He really did set out as a young prince, very young, in these passages, beautiful passages where he talks about shaving for the first time, and I mean, very amusing things. But when he arrives in Kabul, which of course he conquers, he's not welcomed into Kabul, he conquers it. But it is he's been looking for a kingdom, and this place fits the bill. So I think that somehow, he laid down his his bed there, and that was the place that he kind of had a fusion of feeling for. And it was until later that he went to India and conducted all the other.
But then I went to India, before I began to think at all about Babur and Afghanistan, and I went to India, and I became very involved in Mughal. I was interested in Mughal art and architecture, and I saw it. His ancestors, people like Shah Jahan and Jahangir, and built these superb buildings like the Taj Mahal and many other wonderful mosques and tombs. And I was already kind of ready for Babur. I mean, I didn't know that much about him. I knew he was the ancestor who had caused all this to happen because of his descendants. And so I was already partly there with because of my interest in Mughal art and architecture in India.
Thank you to the two of you, James and Giles, for sharing this film with us.